I am so glad to have you here with me. I'm going to be your host for the next couple of episodes here on the Build Your Flywheel. Hello and welcome to hello and hello and welcome to Build Your Flywheel. My name is Melvin Tan and I'm going to be your host for this show. Now, before we kind of move on to the show proper, I just want to first and foremost wish every single one of you good health. And by hello and welcome to Build Your Flywheel. My name is Melvin and I am going to be your host for this show. Now, before we get on to the show proper, I just want to be first and foremost wishing one and all of you a good health. And by that, I meant, at the personal level, whether we're talking about physical health, mental health, emotional health, and that's something that you want to take care of. Now, once that is done, welcome to the Build Your Flywheel show. My name is Melvin, and I will be your host for this show. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to first and foremost wish every one of you listening great health. And by health, I mean at the personal level, whether you're talking about physical health, mental health, or emotional health, that's something that you need to take care of. Now, once you have that under your control, then that is when you want to look at the health of your business. And speaking of business, some of us might think that to start a new business in this current context against the backdrop of this global pandemic could sound a little crazy. But is that really? Well, one thing for sure, many of this thing that we are going to be experiencing going forward is what we're going to be calling the new norm or the new normal. And many things on in the new normal, it's something that we either haven't anticipated or it's something that we thought was never going to come. And so here is a great opportunity for all of us to recalibrate our mindset and to revalidate our assumptions. Been assuming it's going to continue post pandemic may not happen at all. And some of the things we kind of take for granted may now become a luxury. And so, with that, we really need to take a look at how this whole world is panning out in this, what we call a new normal. And this is what I'd like to talk to you here today, right? And this is about the new normal. One of the key things that we have learned in this new normal is school closure, right? In fact, the World Economic Forum has estimated that a total of 1.2 billion students are being locked out of their classroom. The fact that now they cannot go back to school and they need to learn in some way, shape, and form remotely, that has created a lot of issues for some families, but yet at the same time, a great opportunity for the rest of us. And if you look at the figures where it is estimated by the World Economic Forum, it is projected that an estimate of about $350 billion of the overall market for online education, it's going to be seen in the year 2025. And wait a minute, because we haven't even included the estimates for online learning in the corporate world. So what does that mean to all of us? I think one of the key things is that it brings about a great amount of opportunity. And as well, and it has also caused this whole idea of digitalization to be fast-tracked. And some of the examples here are something that you probably have experienced yourself during this pandemic lockdown. So one is many of us have been forced to work from home. For some of us, it's a natural transition. Some of us actually enjoy it, but some of us do not. And some of us could not because of circumstance or because of the type of work that we do. The next that you see, especially if you have got school going children, is this idea about remote learning. And and I'm not just talking about remote learning for students in school, but many a time, many of the trainings that I have once been conducting in the face-to-face format has now been forced online. And so, what does that mean? The next thing that we are beginning to see emergence of is this thing called telehealth, where you are able to see a doctor via a video conference call, and through the series of questions that the doctor asks you and some of the tests that the doctor is able to ask you to administer at your end will enable the physician to kind of give you a simple diagnosis. Well, of course, in serious circumstances, this doesn't help at all. But the point is that many other situations whereby you do not need to come face to face with a physician, this is going to be something more commonplace going forward. Now, the other thing that I think many of us are beginning to see is that does everyone need to travel to a place to attend a seminar or a conference or some kind of an event? Is that necessary? Is that the best use of our time? And is that efficient? And is that even sustainable at a global level? And so that has required us or forced us to rethink the way that we have organized events, looking at virtual events at some of the examples. And so with that, we recognize that many things are going to change. Many things are definitely going to change. I don't like it. Hello and welcome to Build Your Flywheel. This is a show hosted by me, Melvin Tan. And before we get into the show proper, I just want to wish all of you good health. And when I say good health, I'm looking at two levels. At one level really is your personal health. That is something that we all need to take care of first. Then we can talk about the health of our business. And speaking of business, to think of starting a new business against the backdrop of this global pandemic can seem a little crazy, but is it really? Because looking at what's going forward, it's what everyone has been talking about, the new norm. But what exactly is this new norm, or new normal as they call it? Well, the way I see it is the following. Some of the things that we have always been doing, moving forward, the way that we do it is going to change. For example, in the past, we could have just jumped into the car and drive a couple of miles down and to meet up with someone in person to grab a cup of coffee and to talk over certain thing. Now we're going to replace that with perhaps a Zoom call, or every time where we talked about meeting up with someone for coffee. Is that really absolutely necessary? So that's one thing that it's going to change moving forward. The other thing that will change moving forward is some of the things that we have kind of taken for granted before the pandemic strikes. Some of these things probably are never going to happen again. So for example, some of the things that we have taken for granted that it's always going to be there. For example, in-person, face-to-face training. That's something that we have kind of assumed that it is going to happen, that it is going to stay. But right now, as we know, many of those learning has gone remotely. And of course, within this context of things, there are certain things that are going to be new. The way that we live, the way that we socialize, the way that we learn, the way that we do business, the way that our customer interact with us, some of this is going to be new. And some of this, we have not even seen the birth of it yet. And so right now, it's a great opportunity for us to recalibrate our mindset and to think about whether some of the assumptions that we have held back before the pandemic struck, whether it's that still valid. And if not, what are some of the things that we can do going forward? And so that's what I want to talk to you here today about. This is the new normal. And one of the key things that many of us has observed, especially those of us with school-going children, has observed during the pandemic lockdown, is the closure of schools. Many of us would have our kids studying at home instead of going to school. And by the estimates of the World Economic Forum, it was projected, or it was estimated, that 1.2 billion students were out of the classroom. And in fact, they have been learning online or doing some form of remote learning. In the worst case scenario, some of them were just shut out of school altogether. And that translates to an estimate of 350 billion when we talked about the online education overall market size by the year 2025. And these estimates are taken from the World Economic Forum. So what does that tell us? I think that tells us that there are abundant opportunity, especially for those of us who are looking at embracing this new norm, because based on those estimates, we haven't yet even factored in learning in the corporate sector. But before we talked about learning in the corporate sector, let's look at what are some of the things that have changed during this pandemic. One thing for sure, digitization has been fast-tracked. And this has been seen in four typical examples. Number one is that many of us, instead of heading out to the office or going out to work, we are forced to work from home, whether we like it or not. And we then have to recalibrate all our routines and our tools to make sure that we are able to function effectively and productively when we're working from home. And it's not just the adults who are staying at home, but the students are also forced to stay at home because of school closure. And that has generated this idea of remote learning. And as we mentioned earlier, some of the students are better prepared than others. But even in the online learning space for corporates, you have also seen that happen, because many of my training projects that were supposed to be carried out in a face-to-face context now has all turned into a remote learning. And so those are some of the things that we have seen. Now, the other aspect that you may or may not have experience in is this whole idea of telehealth. And telehealth essentially is to be able to see a doctor via video conferencing. And based on the questions that the physician asks you, he or she would then be able to give you a simple diagnosis and even courier your medicine to your place of residence. And that's going to be commonplace, especially going forward, whereby there may not need to be a need for you to physically head down to see a doctor. Instead, some of this recurring consultation without the need for examination could very well be done online. And of course, lastly, the question about whether is it really possible and is it really necessary for everyone to travel from all over the world to congregate at a place so as to attend this thing called a conference? Is there really a need to do that? And is there a better way to do it? And so as we see, many virtual events are popping up all over the place. Now, we all talked about all these things that have changed. And I think, you would agree with me that many things going forward are going to change. That said, there are also certain things that are going to remain the same. And some of these things are what we call fundamentals. Now, let's take a look at what are some of the key fundamentals that are going to remain the same, whether is it pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, or whatever situation or context we are going to run into. Some of these fundamentals will remain the same. So there are three key fundamentals that will remain the same no matter what. Number one is where you talked about earning the attention of your audience, whether it's in the 70s when the medium was radio, in the 80s when the medium was the television, in 2000 when the medium was the internet, this fundamental has remained the same. And so when we talk about the fundamental of to be able to attract the attention of your audience, this one key thing remains. What's in it for me? Now, until and unless you are able to present what you have to share with your audience that is going to benefit them, they're probably not going to pay attention to you. Besides, the amount of content that is out there far outweigh the amount of attention that we have to spare. And so that's fundamental number one. Fundamental number two is the idea about learning as an adult. Now, for many of us adult learners, what we are looking at is when we learn, it is more problem-oriented than content-oriented. So what I mean by that, or what Malcolm Knowles talks about, is the following, that an adult would not learn just for the sake of learning alone. An adult will learn and he or she is motivated because he or she has a problem that they want to solve. And that's why they are equipping themselves with the new skills or new tools to be able to resolve that problem. And finally, especially in today's context, one of the key things that you really must have in your business is a system. And this system, ideally, it should be automated. And that's what we are going to be sharing with you in the coming weeks. You need to have an automated system that is not just profitable, it is also sustainable as well as scalable. And so in the next couple of weeks, we are going to be sharing with you each of these fundamentals, how it has not changed, but within the context of this new environment, this new norm, what are the strategies, what are the tools that you can use so that you can win? And then with that, you would then be able to build your own flywheel. Once again, this is Melvin from Build Your Flywheel Show, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Bye-bye.